Tonight, we gently turn our attention to a question that often hides in plain sight, a question woven deep into the roots of science itself. Today, we're going to talk about something quiet but powerful. You begin with a question. That question feels like yours, a fresh spark, a moment of clarity that emerges from the quiet. But long before your question was formed, there were frames. Soft, invisible, and ancient dot, they hold the shape of your thoughts like hands gently shaping. Clay, you do not feel them directly. You live inside them, like fish unaware of water. They are not walls. They are the air your ideas breathe. You ask, why does the apple fall? And that question already assumes down is meaningful. You wonder, how does light move? But there is already a road, a sense that light must be going somewhere. Even to wonder what is real is to believe in a difference between appearance and truth. The frame is always there, quiet, holding. You don't notice the frame because it doesn't resist you. It agrees with you. It mirrors the world you've known since childhood. A world where objects are solid, where time flows forward, where cause leads to effect. These things feel obvious. They feel like facts, but they are only the first lens, not the last. Imagine an artist who's only ever painted with blue. They do not question the sky. They do not question the ocean. They do not notice that their brush never chooses red. The frame is not what they see. It is how they see dot in science. Every discovery is touched by this same quiet shaping. Before the telescope, the heavens were smooth and perfect. Before the microscope, there were no cells. The eye could not see them, and so the mind did not believe they were there. And so science begins not with what you find, but with what you are prepared to see. The readiness to see is built from everything behind you. From childhood stories, from classroom blackboards, from words spoken with great certainty. You may not remember when you learned to think in categories. You may not notice that you believe in beginnings, middles, and ends. Even the idea that truth is out there waiting to be uncovered is itself a kind of belief. A deep trust that the universe is structured, that patterns are meaningful, that chaos is not all there is. And so, in the stillness of night, you begin to wonder, what else might be true if you had learned to ask in another way? There is something tender in this. To notice the quiet frame is not to discard it. It is to honor the beauty of its usefulness, while also recognizing its limits. Think of an old map. Beautiful, curled at the edges, drawn with great care. It shows the mountains you know, the river you follow, the stars you trust to guide you. But beyond its edge, the cartographer once wrote, "Here be dragons." Not because dragons were real, but because the map had run out. Assumptions are like that. Edge, they carry you far. They guide you well, until you reach a place where the map no longer fits the land. Many scientific revolutions begin at these edges. When Galileo looked through his telescope, he didn't just see Jupiter's moons. He saw that the heavens were not unchanging. When Darwin traced the branching patterns of life, he did not just see species. He saw that change was constant, not fixed. But these revolutions did not begin with data. They began with a small, quiet moment. A moment when someone said, "What if the frame is wrong?" Tonight, in the softness of thought, you return to that moment. You sit at the edge of your own maps, not to erase them, but to ask gently, "What have I always assumed?" You assume time moves forward, but physics tells us that equations work the same in both directions. You assume space is empty, but it churns with energy and quantum events. You assume the observer can be separate from the observed, but entanglement and uncertainty whisper otherwise. None of these things are wrong, but none of them are unshakable. And to realize that is not frightening. It is freeing dot to question. The frame is to open a door in your mind, to let in air, to let in light, to let in the possibility that something else has always been waiting, just beyond the boundary of your beliefs. And it is not just science that lives by these frames. It is you, your identity, your habits, your sense of meaning. You build yourself with the same assumptions you build your questions with. And sometimes, in the quiet of night, you feel them shift, a moment of pause. A new metaphor, a word you never used before suddenly feels like home. And you wonder, what other truths have I overlooked because the frame told me not to look? You are not lost. You are exploring. To become aware of your assumptions is not to become unsure. It is to become aware. To recognize that thought itself has edges. And beyond those edges, something waits. Not dark, not dangerous, but different. Carry the frame gently now. Not as armor, but as a window. And when it blurs, when it fades, you do not panic. You breathe. You listen. And you prepare to ask a deeper question, because beneath every thought is a softer one. And beneath that, another, smaller, quieter, but more alive. And eventually, you reach the breath of thinking itself. The moment before form. The moment before the question is asked. That is where the next journey begins. A journey into the air you think inside, where thoughts are not solid, but shifting currents, shaped by the atmosphere of everything that came before. You breathe. In slowly, but not just air. You breathe in words, patterns, possibilities. Ideas arrive on the wind of culture, carried by language, shaped by the era in which you live. They slip in so quietly that you don't even feel them. They settle in your lungs, your thoughts, your questions. This is the air you think inside. It is not made of molecules, but of metaphors. Invisible, but everywhere. It carries with it not just what you know, but how you know. Not just what you imagine, but what you can imagine. You don't float above it as a detached thinker. You swim through it like a fish through water. And like the fish, you rarely notice the medium, only when it changes. Only when something stirs, or shifts, or resists. Some of this air is ancient. You still think with Aristotle's bones and Newton's breath. You inherit centuries of imagery, of levers and clocks, particles and waves. Of the mind as a lantern, the body as a machine, the brain as a circuit board. Metaphors that once helped, now woven into the fabric of meaning. You don't see them as metaphors anymore. You see them as truth, but they are just scaffolding, temporary structures built to reach understanding, never meant to become prisons. Even the shape of science is shaped by the air. What counts as a good explanation? What kind of answer is considered elegant or complete? You've been taught to value simplicity, to seek patterns, to trust what can be measured. These are not wrong, but they are not inevitable. Different. Centuries breathed different air. In ancient China, the body was a flow of energy, not a machine. In medieval Europe, disease was imbalance, not infection. In indigenous traditions, nature was not a set of objects, but a living relationship. You breathe a modern air now, filled with genes and algorithms, neurons and networks. You see the world in terms of systems, inputs, outputs, loops. And this helps you understand. But it also limits what you can see. Like a lens, the air brings some things into focus and blurs others. It emphasizes mechanism over mystery, quantity over quality. It prizes the external over the internal, the outer world over the inner experience. And so you may find yourself asking, what is this air left out? When you hear the word consciousness, does the air become thin? When you wonder about meaning or beauty, does the scientific sky feel narrow? Not because those things don't matter, but because the current air struggles to hold them. There is no clear formula for awe, no unit for wonder, and yet you feel them, deeply, in the silence before sleep, In the pause between questions, in the spaces where data ends. They are part of your mind's weather, a gentle front of feeling that never fully passes. Proof may not be there, but presence is thought. You begin to notice how the air changes with time. When a discovery reshapes thought, the atmosphere shifts. A new metaphor arrives, a different way to imagine. Suddenly, the world feels slightly tilted, and everything stopped. When Darwin introduced evolution, the air thickened with uncertainty and wonder. Species were no longer fixed, time no longer short. When Einstein bent space and time, the atmosphere bent too. Even light no longer traveled in a straight line of certainty. The great discoveries don't just add facts. They transform the space of thinking. They make the familiar feel strange, and the strange feel natural. And they remind you that the air is never still. It is always in motion, always becoming something else. This doesn't mean truth is out of reach. It means truth is a mountain seen through shifting fog. The mountain is there, but each breath of wind brings new angles, new shadows. And with each shift, you see a little more. You might wonder, if you cannot escape this air, how can you ever know what is real? But the answer is not to escape. It is to become aware, to breathe with intention, to ask again and again, what assumptions ride on this breeze? Some winds are gentle, the kind you follow without question. Some are gusts, strong with dogma or fear. Some swirl with change, with rebellion, with possibility, and some are still. So still they reveal the quiet rhythm beneath your thoughts. Tonight, you let yourself drift with that stillness. You notice the background hum of ideas that shaped you, that science must be testable, that nature is knowable, that the universe is lawful. You do not discard these beliefs. You hold them softly and ask, who taught me to think this way? You remember that science, too, was shaped by poets and philosophers. That imagination came before the microscope. That stories of order and chaos, harmony and chance, came before experiments. That even now, behind every equation, there is a metaphor whispering. And so, you breathe in again. And as the air fills your chest, you feel its texture. You feel the stories embedded in it, the time it carries. You feel how it opens some thoughts and closes others. Assumptions are not chains. They are more like weather, sometimes sunny, sometimes dense with fog. And like weather, they can be forecast, questioned, even changed. You are not trapped. You are floating. And floating means you can turn. Perhaps you begin to ask softer questions. Not just what is true, but what do I take for granted? Not just how does it work, but why do I think it should? These are not endpoints. They are currents. You move gently with them now, not to find answers tonight, but to notice the shape of the air. And as you drift towards sleep, one more thought passes through you, quiet as mist, steady as breath. If the air around your thoughts is made of metaphors, then which ones have you mistaken for the sky? There are thoughts so deeply rooted in you. You do not know they are thoughts at all. They feel like air, like gravity, like the silence beneath music. You don't question them, not because they're proven, but because they seem too natural to doubt. They are the quiet architects of your reality. You wake and say, the sun has risen. But the sun does not rise. It is the earth that turns. Still, the language remains. The idea holds. Because once, long ago, it made sense to see the heavens move around you. And even now, long after Copernicus, the image endures, not in science, but in speech, in rhythm, in instinct. Some assumptions are like that, remnants of old frames, not false, but fossilized. They no longer guide discovery, but they still shape perception. They tell you what is normal, what is stable, what is real. You think in lines, beginnings, middles, and ends. You trust the flow of time, a river always moving forward. But the universe does not favor your sense of time. In the laws of physics, time is reversible. An equation does not care if you run it forward or backward. Still, you wake into morning and drift into night. You remember yesterday. You imagine tomorrow. You mark your life in a direction, a story written with one arrow. And that story feels solid. Until you learn that time may not flow at all. What you call the present is not a fixed moment, but a slice of light and memory. Relativity shows you that time stretches, bends, dilates. A clock on a mountaintop ticks differently than one at sea level. And so, you begin to ask, what else have I mistaken for universal truth? You believe in objects, chairs, rocks, atoms. You name them, touch them, think of them as things. But beneath the surface, there is no thing, only relationships. Even particles are not tiny marbles, but clouds of probability, flickers of interaction. Fields shimmer, energies dance. The universe is more verb than noun. Still, your language pulls you back. You say this is and, that is, as if the world is made of little boxes. But perhaps reality is more like a song, each note meaningful only in relation to the next, each sound shaped by silence, each part defined by connection, not isolation. Your brain seeks certainty. It likes categories, distinctions, rules. It learns patterns in childhood and rarely revisits them. The sky is up. The ground is down. The self is inside. But these two are ideas, helpful, comforting, and incomplete. For centuries, people believed heavier objects fell faster. It felt right. It fit the world they knew. It wasn't until Galileo dropped spheres from a tower that the illusion cracked. And even then, it took time for the new idea to take hold, for the old to loosen its grip. Every era carries its blind spots. Not because people refuse to think, but because they do not know there's something to question. A fish does not see water until it is pulled from the sea. You do not see assumptions until they are shaken, or you step outside them. Sometimes, a single new idea shifts everything. The earth moves. The atom splits. Light behaves like a wave, and also like a particle. Each time, the impossible becomes the new obvious. But before that shift, there is resistance. Your mind clings to the known, not from stubbornness, but from habit. Assumptions feel like truth because they have never been tested. They are scaffolding for your thoughts. Too close to notice, you assume that you are separate from the world. That you begins at the skin. That thought is private. But the brain responds to the world like an echo, shaped by sensation, memory, language, relationship. Is the self a boundary or a process? You assume nature is outside of you. That science studies it while you observe. But you too are made of star matter. You are one more node in the great web of energy and form. You are not separate from the tree or the tide or the thunder. You are in it, of it, breathing. With it. Even your curiosity, this soft urge to understand, emerges not from detachment, but from longing. From the desire to belong to the truth, to touch it gently in the dark. You are not looking for control. You are looking for connection. And so, the quiet revolution begins not in the lab, but in the mind. In the moment you ask, what if this thing I've never doubted isn't quite right? Not wrong, but incomplete. Not false, but too small. There is a deep humility in this. To question what you've always believed is to admit how much you still don't know. It is the beginning of wisdom, not the end of knowledge. The beginning of science, not the collapse of certainty. And this humility is not heavy. It is light. It floats like dust illuminated by evening light. It dances with questions, It softens with wonder and leaves room for surprise. Tonight, you let your thoughts drift into this space. You notice what feels obvious and ask where it came from. You notice what feels certain and wonder what it's built upon. And you begin to listen not just to answers, but to the quiet thrum of ideas you didn't know you'd inherited. These are the roots beneath your thoughts, the quiet shaping beneath every question. And once you feel them move, gently, softly, you find yourself asking, what is the shape of the question itself? Every question you ask holds a shape, sometimes sharp, like a needle, precise and focused, sometimes round like a bowl, open and waiting, but never formless, never truly neutral. You think of questions as doorways to knowledge, but every doorway is carved by someone. When you ask, how does this work? You're expecting a mechanism. You picture a system of parts, cause and effect, something to be taken apart and explained. When you ask, why did this happen? You lean toward purpose, toward intent, toward narrative, toward meaning. But even these simple words, how, why, when, what, bring assumptions with them. You were taught to ask questions. From childhood, why is the sky blue? What makes the wind blow? But even before you could speak, the world whispered answers in its silences. And those early answers, whether spoken or felt, shaped the kinds of questions you learned to ask. Science thrives on questions. But science does not begin when a question is spoken. It begins when a question is shaped, when curiosity becomes a particular form, a structure. A well-formed scientific question is often one that can be tested, measured, observed. But what if something lies just outside that frame? You may ask, how fast is the light? But not, what does light feel like to itself? You may ask, what causes memory? But not, where does a memory live before it's recalled? Not because the second questions are unworthy, but because the shapes of science don't always fit them. The scientific method loves clean edges. It wants clarity, predictability, reproducibility. But the world is not always tidy. And when your questions try to fit everything into neat boxes, the unmeasurable slips away. Still, you carry these questions. Like tools. Some are like chisels, breaking complex things into parts. Some are like mirrors, reflecting your own mind back at you. And some are like seeds, planted without knowing what will grow. Imagine asking, what is life? That question sounds simple, but the answer depends on the shape you expect. Is life defined by cells, by movement, by reproduction? Or by experience, memory, desire? Your definition bends the answer, and your question bends the definition. You often think questions emerge from nowhere, sparked by wonder, by curiosity. But the truth is subtler. Questions arise from the frameworks you've inherited, from language, from metaphor, from the mood of a time. In one era, people asked how the heavens moved in perfect circles, because they believed perfection lived in circles. In another, they asked how electricity moved, and they imagined it like a fluid, because they knew water and saw everything in terms of flow. Even now, you ask questions shaped by digital metaphors. You wonder if the brain is like a computer. You talk of storage, input, output, bandwidth. Not because the brain is a machine, but because machines are what you know. Asterisk. And so, every era builds a house of questions. Walls made of assumptions, windows shaped by tools, doors that open only one way. And inside that house, discoveries bloom. But outside, something waits, a truth that doesn't yet fit the frame. This does not mean your questions are wrong, only that they are not the only ones. And sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do is not to answer a question, but to reshape it, to tilt it, to soften its corners, to let it breathe. Einstein once asked, what would it be like to ride on a beam of light? Not a testable question, at least not at first. But from that strange, poetic image came relativity. The shape of the question shifted reality itself. So tonight, you pause. Not to seek answers, but to feel the edges of your own questions. Are they pointed, rounded, heavy, gentle? Do they open doors or close them? You hold one in your hand now, a quiet one. Maybe it's shaped like a spiral or a sphere or a thread. Maybe it has no answer at all, but it leads you somewhere new. And that is enough. Not all questions need answers to have value. Some are places to rest. Some are lanterns to carry. Some are ways of saying, I do not know, but I wish. To see. And when you step back to look at the shape of your questions, you begin to see something else. That every puzzle you build begins with a hidden frame. A hidden frame that tells you what counts as real. That frame is not static. It is built by your culture, your time, your childhood, your language. It tells you what kind of knowledge is noble, what kind is soft, what should be measured, and what should be left to art. But sometimes a whisper breaks through. A question shaped like no one else's. A thought that doesn't fit the old mold. And with it, a new puzzle begins to form. A puzzle made not of things, but of timing. Of when you live, and how your thoughts are carried by the winds of now. Of how your mind is shaped, not just by facts, but by the season in which it blooms. So, you lie back, letting your thoughts drift, your questions loosen, and you wonder, almost dreamily, what else is shaped. By the time you live in, you wake into a time that is already in motion. The world around you, its language, its tools, its fears and fascinations, all hum like background music. You didn't choose this melody, but you hum along with it just the same. And because of that, you don't always hear it, but the music is there. It plays behind your questions, beneath your logic, inside your awe. You live inside a moment in history, and that moment filters your thoughts like colored glass filters sunlight. It doesn't block the light. It shapes the way it shines. You may think your curiosity is timeless, but even your wonder wears a clock, not a mechanical one, but a cultural one. An atmosphere of now, soft but real. It's not just your clothes and your calendar that come from this age. So does your sense of what's possible. The ideas that feel natural, the explanations that feel satisfying, the kinds of mysteries that feel worth solving. All of them carry the scent of the present. Centuries ago, people gazed at the stars and asked how they moved, but they did not ask what gravity is. They saw the heavens as divine and orderly, not as mechanical systems to be modeled and measured. Their tools, their metaphors, their questions came from their time. Then came Newton, living in a world of clocks and gears. He imagined the cosmos as a grand machine, precise, mathematical, predictable. His world shaped his question, and his question shaped his answer. Later, Darwin walked through forests in an era of global expansion, cataloging life at a time when maps were growing, when species were being named, when natural order felt like something to uncover. His question was not just scientific, it was deeply historical. Even Einstein's relativity emerged not in a vacuum, but in an age of trains and telegrams, of synchronized time zones, and a new obsession with speed. It was no accident that time itself became the thing to question. The age had already started bending it, and now, you live in a time of networks. Your mind is steeped in algorithms, data, complexity. You imagine brains as information processors, the body as code, life as a system of inputs and outputs. So, the questions you ask now. How does consciousness emerge from neural circuits? Can artificial intelligence become aware? Is the universe a simulation? These are not eternal questions. They are now questions, born from the lens you look through. This doesn't make them less important. It makes them situated. And it means that the questions you never ask might be the ones your age cannot yet imagine. You may not think to ask, what does it mean to know something collectively? Or, how does the land think with us? Because those aren't the kinds of questions that your time has prepared you for. Not yet, but times change. And with them, the air of thought shifts. New metaphors arrive, old ideas fall away, and suddenly, a question that once made no sense becomes the doorway to discovery. There was a time when the atom was just a word, indivisible, unseeable. Then tools arrived that could split it open. There was a time when bacteria were unthinkable, when disease was blamed on air, on imbalance, on spirits. But the microscope changed what could be asked. Technology does not just answer questions. It changes the questions themselves. When you invent a telescope, you don't just see farther, you imagine farther. And so your age builds tools, and those tools remake your mind. Every theory you believe, every mystery you name, lives inside this ongoing dialogue between invention and insight. But there's another layer too, a quieter one. The values of your time shape your science. Not just what you study, but why you study it. What you measure is influenced by what you care about. What gets funded, what gets shared, what gets remembered. These are choices, not accidents. You live in an era that loves certainty, that seeks control, that prizes prediction. So your science leans toward the measurable, toward the concrete, toward the neatly modeled. But there are other ways of knowing, ways that your time may not yet fully welcome, ways that listen more than measure, ways that wonder more than predict. And maybe you begin to ask, what are the questions of tomorrow? The ones that haven't been born yet, but are waiting beneath the surface of now. Will future minds ask about the sentience of forests, the emotional life of atoms, the intelligence of systems too vast to name? Or perhaps they will look back at us and marvel that we didn't ask better questions about care, about humility, about interconnection. Because just as no science is free from culture, no era is free from blind spots. And the lens of now, no matter how clear, always leaves something just beyond view. Still, it's the lens you have. It is not a flaw, it is a starting point. And as you breathe within it, you learn to stretch it, bend it, open it wider. Tonight, you rest in the knowledge that your questions are time-marked, and that's what makes them beautiful. They are footprints of the moment, each one shaped by this particular sky, this flicker of history, this way of seeing. And just before sleep takes you, a quiet thought rises, gentle and glowing. If this moment shapes your questions, then how your questions shape what you call truth. You hold a ruler in your hand, not just a strip of wood or plastic, but an idea, a quiet decision made long ago. This will be the length we agree on. This will be one. But before rulers, there were footsteps. Before clocks, there were shadows. Before seconds, there were the slow and steady beats of the heart. Measurement has always started with the body, with what you can feel, hold, walk, watch. In ancient times, the foot was a real foot. The cubit was a forearm. The span was the stretch of a hand. People didn't separate the measure from the measurer. The world was sized in human terms, woven with meaning, not abstract numbers. And then slowly, something changed. People began carving time into smaller pieces, slicing space into finer lines. They built sundials, sandglasses, pendulums. Not just to track, but to control. Because when you measure something, you can plan it. When you measure time, you can divide a day, promise a moment, charge by the hour. When you measure land, you can divide it, own it, sell it. Measurement is power, quiet, steady, binding. But before the power comes the choice. And every measurement is born from a moment of agreement. Let this stone be the weight of one. Let this swing of a pendulum be a second. Let this platinum rod in a locked room be a meter. What you call standard begins as a story, a shared belief. Even now, with atomic clocks ticking to the vibration of cesium atoms, you live inside an agreement. A second is not a universal truth. It is a choice you've learned to trust. Precise, yes, but still chosen. And this is what you forget sometimes, that measurement isn't just discovery. It is invention. Not only finding out what is, but deciding what to notice, what to name, what to count. The moon moves. The tides pull, your blood flows. But the unit you use to speak of them, that is human. That is culture. You look at a tree and see height, width, volume. You can also measure its shadow at dawn, its sway in wind, its whisper in winter. But you don't. You measure what your time tells you is measurable, and this has always been the case. In ancient Babylonia, people divided time by 60, not because 60 is natural, but because it divides neatly. The clock you live by now, 12 hours, 60 minutes, still carries their logic, their values. In medieval Europe, time belonged to the church. Bells rang through villages, calling people to prayer, dividing the day by devotion rather than labor. Then came factories, and the tick of mechanical clocks replaced bells with bells of another kind. Time became not sacred, but scheduled. You live with that schedule now. Your seconds march. Your hours tick. Your calendar rules your days, and beneath it all, the idea that time is a river measured by drops, clean, precise, relentless. But time does not feel like that. It expands and contracts. A moment of pain can feel eternal. A moment of beauty, gone too fast out in space too, resists being flattened. You stand in a vast valley, and no number captures its hush. You hold a sleeping child, and no scale captures the warmth. Measurement gives you control, but not always understanding. So why do you measure at all? Because to measure is to share. It is to say, I felt this, and here is how you can feel it too. It is to build bridges between minds, a common language of the tangible. But sometimes, measurement hides more than it reveals. You say the forest is 1,000 hectares, but that tells you nothing of its music, its memory, its breath. You say a child is 98 centimeters, but not how they see rain, or dream of birds. The tools of measurement are tools of focus, and what you focus on, you begin to believe is what's real. But the unmeasured still surrounds you, unfolding, humming. Alive. Science depends on measurement, yes. But even science must ask, what are we counting and why? Who gets to decide what counts? And so, you return to the idea of choice. Not just the choice to measure, but the choice of what matters. Before anyone measured the speed of light, they had to believe light had a speed worth knowing. Before genes were counted, they had to be imagined. Before time could be split, it had to be seen as linear. Every measuring stick holds a worldview. Every unit carries history. And once set, these tools begin to shape reality itself. Not just reflecting the world, but quietly recreating it in their image. But the world resists being tamed. It spills over edges. It shimmers beyond the scale. And in those shimmering edges, something stirs. A question that measurement can't quite hold. Tonight, you notice the numbers fading into the background. The ruler softens. The clock quiets. You breathe not in seconds, but in sensations. And in that pause, a new kind of listening begins. You wonder what might be missed when you only trust what can be counted. You wonder what waits beyond the boundary of scale and stopwatch. And as you drift deeper, another question forms in the silence between thoughts. If measurement begins with meaning, then where does meaning begin? You are a creature of patterns. To make sense of the world, you begin by noticing likeness. This is like that. That feels like this. The mind reaches for comparison before it reaches for truth. And in that reaching, metaphors are born. Metaphors are not lies. They are bridges. They take something known and stretch it across to the unknown. They offer shape, color, rhythm to what was once invisible. A way to hold the intangible, even if only briefly. You are told that the atom is a solar system. Electrons orbit like planets. The nucleus is the sun. This picture lives in your mind, tidy and bright. But it is not how atoms truly are. It was a metaphor, a beautiful one. Useful, evocative, but incomplete. Because electrons don't circle neatly. They shimmer in clouds. They exist in probabilities. They are more like whispers than orbits, but the metaphor stayed. And for many, it became the fact. Not out of ignorance, but out of comfort. Because the image made sense. It gave the strange a familiar face. The same is true of the brain. You are told it is like a computer. There are inputs and outputs, wiring and memory, circuits and processors. A helpful metaphor, especially in an age shaped by machines. But your brain is not a computer. It does not store memories like files in a folder. It rewrites, erases, merges, and imagines. A memory is not a fixed thing. It's a reconstruction. A story told slightly differently each time it's recalled. Still, the metaphor is powerful. And it shapes what gets studied, what gets tested. You look for neural circuits because your metaphor tells you they're there. You find what your metaphor prepares you to find. Metaphors are scaffolding. They help you build understanding. But they are not the building. They are temporary, or they should be. Yet it's hard to let them go. Because once a metaphor settles in, it begins to shape language, and language shapes thought. And suddenly, you are not just describing the brain as a machine. You are believing that it is one. But the mind is not made of logic gates. It is not neatly programmed. It is fluid, emotional, biological, ancient. It sings and forgets and dreams. And even if the metaphor was helpful once, what happens when it becomes a limit? When it no longer expands your view, but narrows it? Science grows by replacing metaphors, or, more gently, by evolving them. Each generation inherits the old image, then stretches it, reworks it, or leaves it behind. Think of light. First, it was a wave, then a particle, then both, then something stranger, a quantum field. Each metaphor helped until it didn't. The wave was a ripple on water. The particle was a speck of dust. But light refused to behave. It flickered between metaphors, reminding you that nature doesn't owe you a simple picture. So what do you do then, when the metaphor no longer holds? Do you abandon it? Or do you soften it? Make room for more? This is where humility begins. To say, this helped me see once, but now I must see differently. And this is not just about atoms or brains. It's about everything. You call DNA a blueprint. But blueprints are fixed. DNA responds, dances, reacts to the world. You call space the fabric of the cosmos. But fabrics tear. Do they stretch the way space does? You call time a river. But whose river flows backward near black holes? Each metaphor opens a door, and each door reveals the need for another. Because no metaphor can fully hold the whole, and yet you need them. You cannot walk through wonder without them. Even now, as you lie back in thought, your mind gently weaves metaphors to hold what you feel. You say your thoughts are drifting. That sleep is coming like a tide. The tides are water, and your thoughts are not. Still, it feels right. So you use the image. This is the paradox of metaphor. You must use it, but you must also remember that it's not real. It is a tool, not a truth. It's like mist on a mountain. Beautiful in the morning light, but not the mountain itself. A way to glimpse, not to grasp. So tonight, you pause with your metaphors. You thank them. You notice which ones you've carried for too long. Which ones once served you but now blur your vision. You notice how some metaphors have become invisible. So embedded in your speech, you no longer hear them. You speak of the heart as broken, the mind is sharp, the soul as heavy. What if those were not facts, but habits of thought? And what new metaphors are waiting, just beyond your current way of seeing? You drift towards sleep now, surrounded by images, some borrowed, some fading, some still forming. And just before dreams take you, you wonder, if metaphor is the lens, then what does the lens keep you from seeing? You pick up a tool, and the world changes. A magnifying glass and a grain of sand becomes a boulder. A telescope, and stars that once felt fixed begin to wander. You place a device between you and reality, and what comes into focus is only part of the truth. Every tool sharpens something, but every sharpening comes at a cost. When you focus, you also narrow. When you zoom in, you let go of the wide. When you measure, you silence what cannot be numbered. A microscope shows you cells, organelles, spirals of DNA, but it cannot show you the warmth of skin, the breath of the body, the pulse of a hand held in yours. It reveals structure but hides experience. Likewise, a telescope shows you distant galaxies, but it cannot capture the way moonlight spills on quiet grass. The beauty you feel when looking up at night, the awe, the silence, the stillness, those are left outside the lens. And yet, you trust your tools. You build your knowledge from their offerings. You believe what they reveal and often forget what they conceal. Science begins with tools, not only with questions and curiosity, but with lenses, wires, formulas, scales. Without them, your senses alone could not stretch far enough. But tools are not passive. They are not just mirrors to nature. They are translators, and like all translators, they choose what to emphasize, what to flatten, what to leave unsaid. A formula can capture the curve of a planet's path. It can map the arc of a falling stone. But it cannot explain why watching a leaf drift down in autumn feels like watching time itself sigh. Equations describe, but they do not feel, and still, you use them. You must, because they give you reach, because they offer consistency, prediction, clarity. But even the clearest tool filters the world. It asks a question with its very design. What do I make visible? And what must I ignore to do so? The thermometer tells you the temperature, but not the story of a summer afternoon. The seismograph tells you the tremble of the earth, but not the fear in the hearts of those who feel it. The EEG records brainwaves, but it does not record longing or laughter or love. And so, a hidden life pulses beneath your instruments, a life of bias, choice, and belief. Because to build a tool, you first must believe that something is there to find. You must believe that neurons fire, that time ticks evenly, that mass and force are measurable things, that the compass only makes sense in a world where you believe in north. The scale only matters if you believe that weight is constant. You bring your assumptions into your tools. You build your beliefs into the machines. And then, once they work, you trust what they show you, sometimes forgetting that you helped. Decide what they would show. This is not a flaw in science. It is its nature, human, thoughtful, evolving. Tools don't just gather facts. They shape what facts become possible. The invention of the microscope didn't just magnify, it created whole new questions. What is a cell? What is life made of? The spectroscope revealed elements in starlight. And suddenly, you were not just looking at stars, you were understanding them. Not just distant points, but places with chemistry, with birth and death. In this way, tools stretch your reach, and with it, stretch your imagination. Still, Every extension has its edge. You may measure the frequency of a sound, but not the way a song makes you remember someone. You may record the electrical pulse of a thought, but not the softness of an idea. Some things resist the net. They slip through unmeasured, not because they are less real, but because they do not speak the language of instruments. And so, you learn to listen differently, taught to ask not only, what does this tool show, but also, what does it leave behind? What did I not see because I was holding this particular lens? You begin to notice how different tools tell different stories. A physicist's detector and a poet's metaphor are both instruments of inquiry, each with its own truth, each with its own blind spots. And maybe, over time, you learn to carry more than one lens. To measure, but also to feel. To weigh, but also to wonder. To observe with instruments, but also with presence. Tonight, as your thoughts soften and slow, you feel your tools quieting too. You place them gently on the table of the mind. Not discarded, but set aside for now. You return. For a moment, to the naked eye, the open ear, the bare hand, the unfiltered world. Messier, harder to pin down. But fuller somehow. You remember that every map is smaller than the land it describes. That no instrument, no chart, no number can hold all that is . And still, you ask, tenderly, what would a new tool look like, one designed not to dissect, but to listen? What would it find, hidden just beyond the edge of your current view? Before you gather a single number, before you mark a line on the graph, or set up a careful control, something stirs quietly inside you, a belief, forming like mist on still water. You believe there's something to find. You believe the world has patterns, that these patterns can be known, that they will reveal themselves if only you listen the right way. Science often begins with this silent nod, a trust that the universe will answer, even before the question is clear. And this trust, this belief, is not weakness. It is the seed from which curiosity grows. You do not start from a blank slate. You start from a landscape shaped by stories, by teachers and questions, by longings and logic. You start with hunches, with quiet hopes, with invisible magnets tugging your thoughts in certain directions. And when you choose where to look, how to measure, what to record, you are not choosing from nowhere. You are guided, gently and unconsciously, by what you already think might be true. This is not corruption. It is humanity. Even the most rigorous experiment is born in a storm of excitement, expectation, maybe even fear. You design your methods to protect yourself from error, but the desire to be right still hums beneath. This is where bias begins. Not as trickery, not as deceit, but as warmth, a closeness to your idea, a faith that your work is worth doing. And this closeness must be both honored and watched, because belief echoes. It shapes how you interpret a faint signal. It nudges your eye toward what confirms, and away from what contradicts. It is not always loud. Sometimes it is a softness, a hesitation to double-check the number that doesn't fit, a gentle smoothing of an inconvenient result. You don't mean to ignore, but your attention, like a flashlight, illuminates what it points toward and leaves the rest in shadow. And the data seem like they speak for themselves. You print them in charts and tables. You say, here is the truth. But truth is rarely so quiet. Data need context, need care, need to be asked the right kind of questions. Imagine this. You study a medicine. You want it to work, not just for science, but for suffering people. The early results are promising. So your mind leans in, just slightly. You design the next phase with hope curled inside it. And maybe that hope colors your interpretation. Or you measure intelligence across different groups. And without knowing it, your definition of intelligence carries your culture's shadow. You believe you are being neutral. But neutrality is not the same as emptiness. It is shaped by what you think neutrality means. In this way, belief echoes in the data. Not always loudly, but rhythmically, subtly, like a low note beneath a melody. And science knows this. That is why there are peer reviews, double-blind trials, replication studies. These aren't punishments. They are mirrors. Ways to see your belief from the outside. Ways to ask, am I hearing an echo or something real? Still, even with mirrors, bias finds a way to whisper, because you are not a machine. You are a person, and every question you ask lives inside the architecture of your heart and mind. So what do? You don't erase your belief. You name it. You walk beside it. You let it speak but not shout. You train yourself to notice your leaning, not to stop being human, but to become more awake within your humanness. You learn to be surprised, to let the data interrupt you, to pause when the result doesn't make sense and ask, what am I not seeing? Sometimes the resistance is the revelation. You expect one thing, but another arrives. And in that moment, you are not just correcting. You are expanding. You are growing into a new way of seeing, one not shaped by what you hoped was true, but by what the world quietly whispered back. These are the moments science lives for. Not just confirmation, but transformation. And sometimes, the most faithful thing you can do is let go of what you wanted to find. You hold your belief softly, like a paper boat in water. And if the wind takes it elsewhere, you follow. Tonight, as your thoughts slow and your breath deepens, you feel your beliefs resting too. Not gone, but quieted. You do not need to discard them, only loosen your grip, because the world is more generous than even your best idea. It wants to show you more, if only you will let it. You drift now between knowing and unknowing, between what you hope and what might yet be. And just as sleep begins to gather at the edges, you wonder if belief can shape the questions you ask. Then who shapes the beliefs themselves? You live in a world built by questions. Every invention, every explanation, every discovery, they begin with a question whispered or written, held close or asked aloud. The questions shape the path. But not all questions are allowed. Some are ignored. Some are laughed at. Some are quietly erased before they ever form. And sometimes, the most important boundaries in science are not around the answers, but around the questions themselves. You may think of science as bold, as always seeking, always exploring. And often it is. But even science lives inside a culture. Even the most open mind lives within a time, a language, a field of view. And within those frames, there are things that cannot be asked, not because they are impossible, but because they are uncomfortable. In every age, science has its taboos. In one era, it was dangerous to ask whether the earth moved around the sun. In another, it was unthinkable to question the fixed categories of race or gender. And even now, in labs and conferences, certain questions are still dismissed, not because they are wrong, but because they fall outside the fence of what is considered scientific enough. What makes a question scientific? Is it precision? Repeatability? Is it the ability to measure and predict? And what then makes a question unscientific? Is it emotion? Subjectivity? Is it a lack of control, of language, of tools? You begin to notice. Sometimes science refuses. Not because it cannot ask, but because it chooses not to. You may study the brain's electrical signals, but not the meaning of the dreams that arise within them. You may study the chemistry of love, but not the poetry of longing. You may chart the lifespan of stars, but not ask what starlight means to someone watching it in grief. These questions, soft, human, layered, are not easily measured. So, they are often left to drift outside the borders, carried instead by philosophy, by art, by silence. But does that mean they are less worthy? There are scientists who tried, who asked, what is consciousness, really? Or does the universe know it is being observed? And sometimes they were met with caution or even ridicule, because these questions touch things science still cannot grasp. Not yet, maybe not ever. And so, fences are built, not always with malice, sometimes just with caution, a desire to protect the clean logic, to keep the house in order. But danger of a fence is not only in what it keeps out, it is in what it makes you stop imagining. A fence says, beyond this, there is nothing for you. Or worse, beyond this lies only nonsense. And slowly, you stop looking. You stop asking questions that cannot be verified. You stop listening to ideas that arrive without instruments. You stop wondering about the things that don't sit neatly in the box. And when that happens, the field narrows. Not because the world has shrunk, but because your map has forgotten to include the wilderness. But curiosity doesn't stop at the fence. Even if unspoken, it circles the edge. Even if hidden, it wonders what lives just beyond us. What might be real that we've learned not to see? Think of it like this. A child asks why the sky is blue. A scientist explains Rayleigh scattering. A beautiful answer. True. Clear. But then the child asks, why does blue feel so peaceful? And suddenly, the room quiets. Because science is not sure how to hold that question. It can describe the eye, the brain, the wavelength, but not the peace. Does that make the question less real? And so tonight, as you rest within your thoughts, you begin to sense the questions science sets aside, not because they are wrong, but because they are hard to shape into numbers. What is the shape of awe? What is the boundary between perception and reality? What part of knowing cannot be? Written in a journal article, there is a humility in knowing what you don't yet know how to ask. There is wisdom in realizing that some mysteries live just outside the light. And yet, that is where many discoveries have begun, in the quiet space beyond the fence. In the questions people once refused to ask them again is not rebellion. It is remembering. It is widening the field. It is planting new seeds in soil that once seemed barren. So you ask now softly, what question do I carry that I've never voiced? What beliefs do I hold about what can be known? You begin to see science not as a fixed set of tools, but as an evolving conversation, one that depends not only on answers, but on the courage to ask bigger, stranger things. And as you drift towards sleep, the fences grow faint. They shimmer and waver, not quite gone, but no longer so sure of themselves. And just before your thoughts fade into dreaming, a gentle question flickers at the edge of everything. If the edge of science is made of silence, what kind of voice might speak from beyond it? A discovery often arrives like a flash, a sharp inhale, a widening of the eyes. It feels like a sudden light breaking through the cloudy drift of thought. But the truth is softer than that dot. Behind every flash is a long darkness. Not a blindness, but a deep, necessary stillness. A kind of quiet that grows in the soil of waiting. Not idleness, but slow, deliberate presence. Listening without grasping. Watching without naming. You know this space, though you might not always notice it. It's the pause between breath and idea, between problem and pattern, between the known and something. Almost seen. Sometimes it feels like nothing is happening. You sit with the question. You look at the numbers. You walk the same mental paths again and again. And still no answer comes. But something beneath the surface is shifting. It's like watching a lake before dawn. Still, cold, silent. And then, without warning, a ripple, a glimmer, a heron rising. Not because the answer appeared out of nowhere, but because the silence made it visible. Science doesn't always honor the silence. It praises data, papers, productivity. It measures progress in publication dates. But ask any scientist, real. Breakthroughs come not only from motion, but from pause. Pause is where assumptions soften. It's where the scaffolding of what you know begins to tremble. It's where a question slips free of its old shape and becomes something stranger and more alive. Think of Newton. The apple story is simple and sharp, a symbol of gravity falling into place, but the truth is slower. Years of wondering, of reading, of letting the mind stretch into patterns not yet drawn. Or think of Kekulé, who dreamed the ring structure of benzene. He didn't find it at a desk. It came to him in a reverie, a snake swallowing its tail, imagination rising in the hush between thoughts. Even in your own mind, you felt it. That moment when you stop trying and something lets go. Not laziness, but trust. Not quitting, but opening. And often, it is then that the idea arrives. Not like a hammer, but like a breeze. A whisper of connection, a glimmer of fit. Something that had been there all along, but was too quiet to hear until now. Silence is not the absence of thinking. It's a different kind of thinking. A spacious one. A thinking that listens rather than pushes. And that silence can feel uncomfortable. You want to move. To solve. To force the answer out of hiding. But not all things yield to pressure. Some truths are shy. Some patterns only appear when the noise dies down and the mind grows soft enough to see. In this way, discovery is not always a leap. Sometimes it is a return, a circling back to something overlooked, a piece of the puzzle that had been resting quietly in plain sight. You don't always need more information. Sometimes you need more space to let the pieces breathe, to let the wrong ideas fall gently away. This is not easy in a world of urgency, a world that measures worth in speed. But the mind, like a forest, needs its winters, a time when nothing seems to bloom, but deep roots are growing. So tonight, you let yourself rest in that stillness, not as failure, but as fertile ground. You remember that the silence before a discovery is not emptiness. It is expectancy, like the hush before a song begins, like the darkness that sharpens the stars. And perhaps that's what makes discovery so magical. Not just the answer itself, but the quiet it rose from. So you breathe now, slowly. You allow the question to rest, not abandoned, but held lightly. And as your thoughts drift, you begin to wonder if silence is the birthplace of seeing. What else might you glimpse if you stop trying to look? You live much of your life in the arms of certainty. The sun will rise. A dropped object will fall. Water will boil when it's hot enough. These are the quiet laws you build your days upon. Certainty feels like safety, like a floor beneath your feet. It gives shape to the unknown, lets you move through the world without fear of falling through. Science, too, is drawn to certainty. It seeks repeatable patterns, the deep rhythms that hold steady under observation. And when those rhythms are found, they're written in the language of laws and principles, etched into textbooks and woven into your sense of truth. But truth, real truth, is never still for long. Even the most trusted ideas are only resting places. Not endpoints, but pauses. Think of Newton, watching apples fall and planets move. He gave the world a gravity that could be trusted, predictable, universal. His equations held everything in place. Until one day, they didn't. The certainty he gave began to shimmer at the edges. Mercury's orbit wobbled. Light bent where it shouldn't, and slowly, softly, the universe whispered, "There is more." So Einstein arrived, not to shatter Newton, but to stretch him, to show that gravity was not a force, but the bending of space itself. And suddenly, what was once absolute became relative. This is how science moves forward. not in leaps of destruction, but in slow rotations. Certainty, yawning, rubs its eyes and begins to dream again. You may imagine science as a collection of truths, fixed, final, polished. But it is more like a sleeping creature, whose dreams change shape as it stirs. Even the firmest ideas must, at times, fall asleep. They do. Not vanish, they rest. They soften around the edges. They wait to be tested again, to be warmed by new observations. And sometimes, they are gently replaced. Not because they were wrong, but because they were no longer enough. To be wrong in science is not shameful. It is inevitable. And it is beautiful, because every theory is a story, told to the best of your knowing. And when that knowing grows, so too must the story. Being softly wrong means staying open. It means knowing that today's certainty may become tomorrow's question. It means understanding that knowledge is not a mountain, but a shoreline, always shaped by the tide. Think of how atoms were once thought indivisible. Then they split. Then they shimmered into clouds of probability. Then they danced with quantum uncertainty, and each step felt certain until it didn't. But none of those steps were wasted. Each became a rung in the ladder, a necessary moment in the unfolding. Certainty is not the enemy. It is a companion, a place to rest before the next journey. But when it becomes too tight, when it hardens into dogma, then it begins to crack. That crack is not failure. It is light. And so, as you drift into thought this evening, you let go of the need to know completely. Rest in the gentle rhythm of evolving truth. You breathe alongside science itself, that living process of becoming. There is grace in not knowing. There is peace in allowing your beliefs to stretch. And when you notice your ideas becoming stiff, you offer them warmth. You let them sleep a little. You wait to see what dreams they bring back. In this way, you become a quieter kind of scientist, one who does not chase answers, but listens for the question beneath them. And tonight, as you lie under a sky that once circled a flat earth, you feel the softness of your certainty. Not because it is weak, but because it knows when to yield. You wonder now, gently, if certainty must sleep, then what wakes when it finally dreams something new? You speak and the world responds. You name a thing, and suddenly it becomes clearer. You call something light, gravity, quark, or muon, and the moment it has a name, your mind begins to fold it into understanding. But language doesn't just describe. It builds. Each word is a soft boundary, a scaffolding of thought. It lifts certain meanings forward and lets others fade into silence. In this way, science is not built only from experiments, but from the quiet power of vocabulary. The words you use become tools. And like any tool, they come with handles and edges, with uses and limits. When you say field, you imagine something spread, invisible yet present, like wind-bending grass. When you say force, you imagine push and pull, something felt but unseen. And with those words, you begin to model reality. Not only in equations, but in metaphor. Language wraps itself around the unknown and gently gives it shape. You speak of the fabric of space as if space were cloth. You describe the memory stored in the brain as if neurons were shelves. These metaphors are not mistakes. They are bridges. The bridges go both ways. They carry ideas across and also limit what paths you can take. A word can light a path, but it can also close a door you didn't know was there. What? Do you call something you have no words for? You've felt this before. Trying to explain a dream, a strange feeling, a half-thought. You reach for words, but they scatter. And without them, your thoughts drift, unheld, unlabeled. In science, this same thing happens. The first ideas are fuzzy, a sense, a pattern, a shift. But until a name is given, the idea remains misthought. It's why Darwin called evolution natural selection. He needed words to hold something new. It's why Einstein spoke of space-time, because time and space had to be seen as one. But those words do more than explain. They direct the next questions, and the next thought. Each term becomes a lens, a way of seeing, and also a way of not seeing. Think of the term junk DNA. For years, this label suggested uselessness, a leftover, a mistake. And so, for decades, it was barely studied. But later, when the name began to soften, when curiosity grew again, scientists began to discover hidden layers of function and code. The words had shaped the inquiry. And when the words changed, so did the vision. This happens again and again. In physics, in biology, in the way you talk about thought. Is the brain a computer? Is the universe a machine? These phrases feel neutral, but they lean the mind in certain directions. They carry hidden assumptions. To say machine is to imagine design. To say computer is to imagine input and output, storage and logic. But what if the brain is more like a garden? What if the universe is more like a dance? Different metaphors, different questions, different science. And so, as you explore tonight, you begin to feel how language surrounds you, not just as a tool, but as an atmosphere. You live inside the weather of words. Some of them you inherited. You learned them before you questioned them. They shaped your early understanding. They carved quiet channels in your thought. Others you've built yourself. You've tried to name the things that matter to you. You've tried to describe the mystery you feel when you look up at the stars. But still, there are places language can't go. There are ideas too slippery, too new, too wide. And that's where science pauses, not in defeat, but in reverence. Because sometimes, not having a word means you're standing at the edge of knowing. It means you've reached something real, but still unnamed. And in that space, you can begin to wonder, what names might come next? What words do you still need to find? You think now of the early scientists, those who stared at the heavens without names for planets, those who saw electricity spark but had no words for charge. They reached through silence and brought back new vocabulary. You carry that tradition. Forward. With every new concept, you widen the language of the world. You teach your tongue to hold more truth. You teach your mind to stretch past its old edges. But it's also worth asking, what words do you already use that no longer fit? What ideas might be waiting just behind a name you've outgrown? To be a seeker of truth is also to be a gardener of language. To prune what limits, to plant what might bloom. And as you drift toward sleep, you let the old words rest. You make room for the unnamed, the unsaid, because sometimes, to grow new knowledge, you must first listen to what cannot yet be spoken. And so the thought rises, unhurried and soft. If your language shapes your mind, what shapes your language? In return, your mind loves pictures. Even when you close your eyes, you see atoms like tiny solar systems, forces as arrows, time as a river flowing forward. These images live behind your thoughts. They are not facts. They are tools, guides, to help you glimpse what the senses cannot catch. And in science, these pictures are called models. A model is not the thing itself. It is a way of holding it, of touching the intangible with the hand of imagination. You cannot see gravity, but you can draw a ball rolling down a curve. You cannot see a molecule, but you can sketch its bonds and angles. You cannot step inside an atom, but you imagine clouds, shells, spins. This is the mind's great gift, to make a mirror inside itself and study what cannot be seen. But even mirrors distort. And every model, no matter how elegant, is a simplification. That's not a flaw. It's a kindness, because the universe is too vast, too subtle, to hold all at once. So you hold part of it, just enough to work with. You build a model, and the model helps you understand that it is a bridge, a translation between what is and what you can grasp. Think of the Bohr model. Electrons spinning in neat orbits, like planets around the sun. It's not how atoms really are, but it's a starting place, a stepping stone into quantum terrain. Later came more accurate models, orbitals shaped like teardrops and clover leaves, mathematical clouds of possibility. Still not the full truth, but closer, better aligned with what experiments reveal. The model changes. The atom doesn't. This is the dance. The world is constant, and your pictures evolve. A model is a metaphor made rigorous, a story told with symbols, a guess that grows more precise. And like all stories, models are shaped by what you choose to emphasize. If you want to know how heat flows, you build a model of particles in motion. If you want to predict the weather, you feed equations into a storm of data. No single model tells the whole tale, but each adds a voice to the chorus of knowing. Even in your everyday life, you model. You picture someone's mood, though you cannot see it. You imagine tomorrow's tasks, though they haven't happened yet. You trace possibilities like invisible maps in the air. And like scientific models, these mental sketches can guide or mislead. To confuse the model with the truth is to walk with a map pressed over your eyes, useful until the terrain shifts. Science knows this. It builds, then tests. And when a model no longer fits, it steps back. It redraws. Think of Ptolemy's model, with Earth at the center, planets looping in perfect circles. It was beautifully wrong, but rich. It made predictions. It helped sailors navigate. It brought coherence to a sky in motion. And then Copernicus shifted the center. Kepler adjusted the shapes. Galileo turned a telescope. And slowly, a new model emerged, one closer to what was real. But even that model, centuries old, was still a sketch. Today, gravity is not a pull, but a bending of space. Mass tells space how to curve. Space tells mass how to move. A new model. Still a model. And so the lesson deepens. The more precise the image, the more humble you must become. Because the beauty of a model can tempt you to believe it is the thing itself. It is not. It is a shadow, an echo, a hand tracing light on a wall. But it is enough. It is enough to send rockets to Mars, to splice genes, to understand stars. Your mind does not need the whole truth to work. It needs a frame and the willingness to REFRME. So tonight, you close your eyes. You imagine an atom. You imagine space. You imagine thought itself, folding into patterns. And you remember, what you see in the mind's eye is not the thing, but the doorway to it. You do not need to discard your models. You only need to hold them gently, as sketches, as translations, as invitations, and as you rest into the softness of sleep. You wonder if models are how you see what cannot be. Seem, what then is guiding the hand that draws them? You are drawn to simplicity, not just because it's easier, but because it feels like truth. A simple explanation calms the mind. It tames the wildness of the world. It tells you that things make sense, that the chaos is only apparent. This longing lives deep in you. It begins in childhood, with stories that offer beginnings, middles, and ends, with answers that fit neatly into a sentence, with puzzles that click into place. And science, too, has inherited this craving, not for simplicity that cuts corners, but for elegance, that rare combination of clarity and depth. An equation that wraps the sky in a single curve. A principle that explains the fall of an apple and the orbit of the moon with the same breath. Einstein once said, Everything should be made as simple as possible, but no simpler. A warning and an invitation. Because simplicity can illuminate, but it can also deceive. When Newton wrote his laws of motion, he gave the world a gift of symmetry and elegance. 3 rules, that's all. Enough to predict the tides, to build machines, to trace the paths of cannonballs and comets alike. But simplicity had its limits. It broke under the strange dance of Mercury. It unraveled in the flicker of quantum states. It fractured when space itself bent under the weight of stars. The universe, it seemed, had other plans. And yet, even in complexity, you still search for patterns. You draw maps, reduce motion to lines, turn phenomena into formulas. You do this, not to deny the richness of reality, but because your mind needs shape. It needs a place to begin. But sometimes, the shape is too smooth, too flat, too final. And so complexity returns not as a flaw, but as a reminder. The world is not built to please your preferences. It is not bound to be beautiful. And yet, you keep finding beauty anyway. Think of the standard model of particle physics, a tapestry of interactions. Fields, forces, particles with odd names. Muons, gluons, strange quarks. It is precise, predictive, and powerful. But it is not simple. It is baroque. It lacks the clean elegance of Newton or Maxwell. And still, it works. You are left wondering, should truth always be beautiful? Or is beauty just a signal, a soft lure that invites but does not guarantee? Occam's razor, the idea that the simplest explanation is usually best, guides much of science. But even razors can cut too close. Sometimes, the simplest answer is simply the one you want it to believe. Because simplicity is comforting. It gives you closure. It wraps mystery in soft cloth. But truth may be jagged. Truth may resist the smoothing hand. Nature doesn't mind being messy. Evolution leaves behind odd leftovers, whale bones that resemble hips, human eyes wired backwards. The universe doesn't optimize for elegance. It meanders. It surprises. And yet, you persist. You build clean models of curved space or trace the elegant spirals of galaxies. You find Fibonacci in pine cones, fractals in snowflakes, harmonies in the laws of motion, because beauty still whispers. It still feels like a clue. There's a gravity in simplicity, a pull that draws you close. That promises a deeper unity beneath the noise. But to follow that gravity wisely, you must also listen for silence. You must make room for what doesn't. Fit. Science grows not only through elegance, but through exceptions. The anomaly, the misfit data, the pattern that breaks the pattern. These are the places new knowledge begins. So you learn to walk the line between clean and honest, between elegant and true. You learn that simplicity is not the end, but the beginning. A first draft of clarity to be edited by reality. As you lie still tonight, your mind drifts through these paradoxes. You imagine an equation etched in starlight, simple, radiant. And next to it, a cloud of complexity, just as vital, just as real. Both belong. You begin to soften your grip on explanations that feel too perfect. You let go of answers that satisfy too quickly. You leave space for the strange, the asymmetric, the unsolved. You breathe into the complexity, not to conquer it, but to befriend it. Because in that friendship, in that quiet willingness to not know everything simply, you become more curious, more awake. And the thought comes gently, rising, like a question at the edge of your rest. If beauty can guide you toward truth, can ugliness sometimes do the same? You do not think alone. Even when you believe your thoughts are private, they lean quietly on the invisible scaffolding of others. Language, culture, shared metaphors. Silent frameworks. Science, too, is a community of thought. It is not the work of one bright mind in the dark. It is a cathedral of questions, built stone by many hands. And like all gatherings, it has its moods, its leanings, its invisible gravitational pull toward what everyone already agrees must be true. Consensus is comforting. It signals that many eyes have looked and many minds have tested. It means that an idea has passed through fire and still stands. But even the warmth of many minds can cast a shared shadow. Paradigms, those deep-rooted structures of belief, are rarely noticed while they reign. They are the air you breathe, not the walls you see. You live inside them, work inside them, measure inside them, until something doesn't fit. An outlier, a misbehaving particle, a stubborn measurement, a quiet voice saying, "What if we're looking the wrong way?" And often, the first response is resistance, not out of ignorance, but out of the human need for coherence, for order, for continuity with what came before. In science, this resistance is woven into method. Hypotheses are tested again and again. The community checks, reviews, asks for proof, requires replication. This is not a flaw. It is a form of protection against the wild winds of wishful thinking. But protection can become prison if the walls are never questioned. There was a time when Earth stood still in every model, in every classroom. A time when light was thought to require a medium to wave through, the invisible ether. A time when ulcers were caused by stress, until a single stubborn scientist drank a beaker of bacteria to prove otherwise. History is full of moments when the crowd was sure and wrong, and it is also full of voices who dared to question before the evidence was overwhelming. This is the quiet bravery science needs most. Not loud rebellion, but soft, persistent doubt held gently inside certainty. It's hard to do because to stand apart, even a little, feels like being alone, and your body notices. It tenses, it listens for cues. Am I safe? Am I accepted? Your biology still remembers the cost of stepping outside the group, but science asks you to do just that from time to time. To look where no one is looking, to wonder what no one is wondering, to say, maybe not, even when everyone else is saying, of course. This doesn't mean always doubting. It doesn't mean every contrarian is a prophet, but it means making space for thought that feels uncomfortable, especially when it's careful, curious, and kind. It means welcoming the question even when you love the answer. The scientific method helps here. It is not just a path to truth, but a practice of humility. It says, test again. It says, let the data lead, even if it leads away from your beliefs. It says, truth is not a vote, but a process. Still, you are human. You want to belong. You want your peers to nod when you speak, and so consensus can seduce. It can feel like clarity when it is only comfort. This is why the healthiest scientific communities aren't echo chambers, but ecosystems with space for skepticism, room for doubt, air for new ideas to breathe. The progress of science often begins at the edge of its own certainty, in the question no one thought to ask, in the result everyone wanted to ignore. You do not have to be loud to see differently. Sometimes you just have to be still long enough to notice what others have missed. You, too, can be part of that noticing. By listening carefully, by questioning gently, by staying curious even when surrounded, by certainty. Not every challenge to consensus is right, but every challenge offered in good faith is a thread in the vast tapestry of discovery. And when enough threads pull loose, the fabric changes. A new paradigm begins. Not with thunder, but often with a whisper. Tonight, as you rest, let yourself feel how strange and beautiful it is to live in a time between certainties. To walk through questions that may reshape everything tomorrow. You are not alone in your wonder. You carry it within a chorus of thinkers, some quiet, some bold. And as you drift towards sleep, a question flickers gently. What if the next great shift is already beginning? In a mind that dares to softly ask, what if we're wrong? You are told again and again that science moves forward, that it begins in darkness and climbs, step by step, into light. That knowledge is a ladder, and each generation climbs higher than the last. But what if progress doesn't always follow the arrow? What if it bends? What if it loops back on itself like a ribbon caught in the wind? Sometimes, the old becomes new again. An ancient idea, once dismissed, returns with different language, wrapped in modern tools, shining with unfamiliar relevance. What seemed primitive can reappear as prescient. What was forgotten wasn't always wrong, just out of season. You think of Aristotle and his belief that nature abhors a vacuum. For centuries, it was laughed away. And then, quantum field theory whispers that maybe emptiness isn't empty after all. Or Democritus, with his invisible atoms, his belief in a universe made of indivisible bits. He had no microscope, no proof, only the poetry of thought. And now, you peer inside matter and find something strangely familiar. The past lingers, not as a mistake, but as a layer science doesn't always discard. Sometimes it rearranges. Even Newton's laws, so sturdy, so beautiful, still hold under most conditions. Though they have been curved, folded into Einstein's deeper geometry, they remain useful, true enough within their frame. And so the story of science is not one of clean replacement. It is a sedimentation, a building of layers, each one holding part of the truth for a certain scale, a certain light. You imagine a spiral staircase. Each revolution brings you to a new height, but also returns you to something familiar, a question you've met before, seen now from a new angle. The Earth moves around the sun, and yet it also returns to nearly the same place. The stars, from your view, circle nightly, repeating, but never exactly the same dot. So too does knowledge circle, sometimes slowly, sometimes with dramatic bursts, revolutions, as Kuhn called them, periods when the foundations shift. But even revolutions contain memory. When Einstein described space and time as one fabric, he didn't destroy Newton. He revealed the wider stage on which Newton had danced. Progress, then, is not always about faster, not always about newer. It is also about deeper, about returning to a question with better tools, or more patient eye. And sometimes progress is a pause, a long season of silence, where a field waits for the right voice, the right metaphor, the right moment. Science has forgotten as much as it has learned. Whole bodies of knowledge lost in time, buried in languages no longer spoken, ignored because they didn't fit the prevailing shape. And sometimes, rediscovery is as important as invention. Think of the concept of emergence, that the whole can be more than the sum of its parts. An idea that flickered in philosophy, then re-emerged in complexity theory, then in neuroscience, then in artificial life. It travels, changing form, always circling. So, what does it mean, truly, to progress? Is it to gather more data? To refine predictions? To dominate nature with precision? Or is it to deepen your questions? To understand your own assumptions more clearly? To learn how to live with uncertainty, without fear? Science teaches you how to ask, not just how to answer. And sometimes, the most honest answer is, not yet. Sometimes, the most beautiful truth is, we don't know. Progress must make space for this, or it becomes performance, a race with no finish line, where speed replaces understanding. Real progress is slow, not because science is inefficient, but because nature is subtle, and your own mind is full of shortcuts, desires, habits of seeing. You must unlearn as much as you learn. You must circle back, not because you're lost, but because returning is how you see a new dot tonight. As you lie still, let yourself imagine this spiral, not as failure, not as repetition, but as rhythm. A spiral is motion with memory. It honors where you've been, even as it lifts you higher. And perhaps the real direction of science is not just forward, but inward, into the questions that hold you, into the patterns that shape your thought, into the vast silence where new wonder begins to breathe. Because somewhere within that spiral, spinning slowly beneath the surface of consensus and certainty, waits a question no one has asked yet. And maybe the question isn't, what comes next? Maybe it is, what have we missed by moving too fast? There is a kind of silence in science, not one of stillness, but of presence without proof. You live in a world full of things you cannot see. Not just the small, not just atoms and quarks, but the enormous, the hidden, the not dash yet dash glimpsed. Dark matter makes up more of the universe than stars, more than planets, more than anything you've ever touched. It holds galaxies together like invisible glue. It bends the paths of light across space, and yet you have never seen it. No one has. It does not glow. It does not reflect. It does not speak in the language of sight. You only know it's there because of how it makes other things move, like wind across grass. You don't see the wind. You see the swaying. Science listens to swaying. But what happens when even the movement is subtle? When your senses, even sharpened by instruments, reach their edge, then you enter a different kind of knowing. Not imagination, but anticipation. You begin to build experiments around what you suspect might be real. You create theories, not just to explain what is seen, but to reach for what remains just outside view. This is how discovery grows. At the edge of doubt, under the canopy of belief. Belief not in fantasy, but in possibility. And sometimes it is your very belief that guides your tools. The telescope was not built before the stars were imagined. The microscope did not come before the idea of the unseen. First came the suspicion, what if there's more? And only then, the search. Some of your most powerful scientific ideas were once invisible scaffolds. Electrons were imagined long before they were traced. Continental drift was ridiculed before satellites confirmed the slow dance of plates. The unconscious mind was once a shadow, and then it became a field of study. You must remember, absence is not emptiness. It may be preparation. You do not blame a blindfold for hiding the mountain. So why blame the present for not seeing what the future will? There is humility in this. To say, I cannot see it, yet. To say, maybe my tools are shaped by what I expect to find. And maybe, if I expect something different, I must shape new tools. Even the concept of tool is broad. A detector, a language, a metaphor. The mind itself is a kind of lens, tuned by culture, by history, by belief. And sometimes, what keeps you from seeing is not distance, but assumption. You may expect the unknown to look like something else, to behave like a particle or a wave or a force. But what if it doesn't? What if it is a kind of relationship or pattern or motion that cannot yet be framed? Think of consciousness. You live within it. You are it. And yet, you cannot hold it in a test tube. You cannot measure its essence. Not fully. You can trace its footprints in the brain. You can watch neurons spark, regions flicker. But the experience, the felt sense of being, still evades capture, and still you search, because the unseen is not unworthy. It is, perhaps, the most worthy. There is courage in pursuing what you cannot yet grasp. It means stepping into the dark with only the glow of your questions. It means building instruments for things you cannot be sure exist. But this is how you found gravity's waves. This is how you mapped the cosmic background. This is how you may one day hold the shape of thought or the edge of space-time. Science is not just a torch. It is a listening dot. It waits. It feels. It sharpens itself against silence. And you are part of that waiting. When you wonder, when you allow yourself to not know, you become the space where new science may one day enter. You become a kind of invitation. Tonight, as your body softens, let yourself imagine all that is here, unfelt, untouched, unknown dot, not in some distant galaxy, but in this very room. Around you, inside you, particles passing through you from space. Dark matter moving silently by. Ideas not yet formed, but preparing. The world is full of things you do not yet have eyes for, but that does not make them less real, dot. It only means you must keep listening. Because maybe the next great discovery is not about building something new, but about becoming still enough to notice what's already here. You've always wanted the truth, not just any answer, but something solid, something unmoved by opinion, something that would still be there in the morning. You want truth to be like stone, unchanging, simple and strong. But here's a quiet secret. Truth in science is rarely like stone. It is more like scaffolding, temporary, useful, beautiful, in its structure, but always ready to be rebuilt. You may think of truth as something waiting to be uncovered, a buried key, a shining core, a map already drawn. But science, the way it truly works, doesn't find truth. It makes models. A model is a way of seeing, a tool for prediction. It is not the world. It is a sketch of the world, dot, and sometimes that sketch is breathtaking. Newton's laws mapped the motions of planets and apples alike. They held the sky steady until they did single quotes to dot, until the edges frayed, until anomalies appeared, until a new kind of truth, Einstein's, took its place. And even that truth now shivers at the quantum scale, dot. So what is truth if it can change? Perhaps it's not a destination, not a final, shining answer. Perhaps truth is the ongoing agreement between what you see and what you expect to see. When they match, you call it knowledge. When they don't, you call it a mystery. And science lives in that in-between space, always reaching for a better match, always adjusting the lens, always redrawing the map, dot. But the world itself, the world outside the models, doesn't need your agreement, dot. It simply is. The wave breaks, the atom splits, the heart beats, whether you understand it or not, dot. So your truth is more like a conversation with the unknown. You ask questions, you build bridges, and each answer leads to another doorway. The danger comes not in the lack of answers, but in mistaking the temporary for eternal, in holding on to a model as if it were the thing itself. You see this in the history of science, in phlogiston, in geocentrism, in theories that once felt permanent until something new was noticed, something too stubborn to ignore, dot. And then the model bends or breaks, dot. This is not failure. This is science. Breathing, dot. To revise is not to betray truth. It is to serve it more deeply. But you must be brave enough to let go. Let go of elegance. Let go of simplicity. Let go of being right. Because truth does not arrive wrapped in clarity, dot. It shows up in contradiction, in confusion, in the patient unfolding of exceptions, dot. It whispers first, dot. It challenges what you thought you knew. And slowly, if you're willing to follow it, it opens the shape of your understanding, dot. Science walks in loops, but loops that spiral outward, each term bringing a wider view. Each question raised is a door unlocked, but only if you don't mistake your current keys for the only ones that could ever exist. You might ask, if truth keeps shifting, how can I trust any of it? But that's the wrong question, dot. Instead ask, is it useful? Is it consistent? Does it explain what I see for now? The word truth has weight. It feels final. But science is a river, not a monument. And the river doesn't stop moving just because you want a still place to rest. Even the constants change. Even the universal speed limit, light, was once debated, measured, remeasured, until a consensus settled in. But consensus is not the same as certainty. It is agreement for now. A pause in the current dot, and science is honest enough to admit that every certainty has a lifespan. Even gravity was once a mystery, still is in many ways. You feel its pull, you measure its force, but you don't yet know why it works. Only how this is the humility of the scientific mind. To know that knowing is a process and to love that process, even as it leaves you without final answers. You don't need to fear that truth changes. You need to fear what happens when you stop letting it when you stop asking, when you stop testing, when you stop being surprised. That's when truth becomes dogma, a frozen model mistaken for the living world. But science is not dogma. It is the art of revision, the discipline of doubt, the courage to say, I was wrong, and now I see more. And what a gift that is. Tonight, as your breath slows, remember, you are part of this river of change. Your own truths have shifted, haven't they? What you believed 10 years ago, even what you believed yesterday, was real to you then. And yet now, something new has entered. That is not loss. That is growth. You can love the truths that served you and still let them go when they no longer fit the shape of the world. Because truth, real truth, is not threatened by questions. It is refined by them. And if truth moves, you must learn to move with it. So ask yourself in the quiet before sleep, can you carry a truth lightly, love it deeply, and still be ready to outgrow it? And what happens when the next model doesn't fit? What lies just beyond the truths you've made room for? Not every door needs a key. Some doors open the moment you realize they're there. And in science, in the long, soft work of understanding the world, those doors are questions. You've spent so much time chasing answers. But what if the real shift comes before the chase even begins? A question is not just curiosity. It's a direction, a lens. It carries assumptions hidden inside about what exists, what matters, what's worth knowing. Before every discovery, before every telescope is aimed, before any formula is scratched into paper, there is a moment when someone wonders, what if? Sometimes that wonder is small, a refinement, a clarification, a better measurement of something already imagined. But sometimes, rarely, quietly, a question appears that doesn't fit within the current story. And in that moment, a world begins to shift. Galileo once asked if the heavens might follow the same rules as falling apples. Einstein asked what it would feel like to ride a beam of light. Chen Wu asked if nature truly treated left and right the same. These were not answers. They were openings. Cracks in the wall. And through those cracks, light changed shape. You may think of science as certainty. But before every certainty, there is a pause. In that pause, something quiet happens. You stop looking for what you expect to find. And you begin to ask what you've never considered. This is not always comfortable. A new question can feel like standing at the edge of a cliff. You see how far the view might stretch, but the ground beneath you feels thin. And yet, that is where wonder lives. Imagine you are in a room filled with familiar light, everything well lit, everything mapped. Now imagine turning slightly and noticing a shadowed hallway you hadn't seen before. To ask a new question is to take a step into that hallway. It might lead nowhere. It might loop back, but it also might open into a cathedral of thought you never knew existed. This is the power of the right question. Not to answer, but to rearrange. To make you see the world sideways. To unsettle your assumptions, just enough that new truths can bloom. And sometimes, the most radical question isn't wild or futuristic. It is gentle. So gentle you barely notice. It's strength. It asks, what have I accepted without knowing? What part of the world have I stopped seeing? Because the questions you don't ask are the ones that quietly shape your limits. They become the edge of the map. And so, science grows not just by building, but by erasing the edges of what you thought was possible. The questions that change everything often arrive disguised. They look simple, obvious, almost childish. What is time? Why is there something instead of nothing? What counts as life? What is the mind? They don't point to one experiment, one instrument, one neat answer. They ask you to look again and then again. And when science listens, the world bends. Paradigms don't crumble from contradiction alone. They shift when someone sees differently. When someone asks, what if this isn't the only way? Tonight, in your mind, you hold 1,000 quiet beliefs. Beliefs about how the world works. Beliefs about what kinds of questions are allowed. About what can be measured. About what can be known. They float through your thoughts like air, transparent, constant, unexamined. But what if one of those beliefs isn't solid? What if it's a doorway? What if, right now, there's a question on the edge of your thinking that could change the shape of your knowledge? Not because it gives you new information, but because it reveals what you've been assuming all along. Sometimes the most scientific act is not to answer a question, but to doubt the question itself. To hold it up to the light, to see where it points and whether that path is narrow or wide. Ask, what kind of answer does this question already expect? And then ask, is that the only answer that could matter? To shift a question is to shift the search. And to shift the search is to shift the future. New questions birth new methods, new perspectives, new understandings. They open fields. They create disciplines. They turn silence into dialogue. And they begin quietly, not with certainty, but with listening. Tonight, you can feel it too. The subtle tension between what you know and what you haven't yet named. Not every question will be revolutionary. Not every question needs to be. But the practice of asking again and again, with care, with humility, with attention to what lies outside the frame, that practice is the heartbeat of science. And of you. You are not just a seeker of answers. You are a shaper of questions. And that, perhaps, is the deeper role of the scientist. Not to find truth, but to ask the kind of questions that allow truth to move closer. So before sleep takes you, ask gently, what have I never thought to ask? And if you asked it, where might it take you? Perhaps to the edge of everything you believe. Perhaps to something ancient waiting in the dark. Or perhaps to the beginning of a new kind of knowing. Let the question float with you now, soft as breath, weightless as a dream. And in the silence between this night and the next, you may find a new doorway forming that leads into the quiet space where questions go when they're still becoming. And so, we end not with a conclusion, but with a deeper quiet. A space where your thoughts can drift, where your questions can breathe. You've listened closely to what lies beneath the surface of science, not just data, but the silent structures that shape it. Now, let this idea settle with you. Let it unfold slowly, like the night. Because the most powerful truths are not shouted, they are softly realized over time. Until next time, stay curious, stay gentle, and let your questions lead you home.